Family, wow, am I excited to share today's conversation with you. Let me tell you about Michael J. Coles. He's the co founder of the Great American Cookie Company. Can you think of a better name for a company and a better promise for what you're going to get for doing business with them? He's also the former CEO of Caribou Coffee, and he has just not followed a traditional line in his growth. He doesn't have that Ivy League education that many people do, but he has a world education that he shares so freely. You know, I don't sell books for people. I have to hold his book up though, because one of the things that Michael's going to share with you is his proceeds go to supporting veterans. Michael really gets invested in the things he cares about, and it's time to get tough. He has written this book as the result of a life that has been so well lived. And more importantly, he's continuing to live that life. And he's doing what I love to teach others to do and try to example myself. And that is to do well and do good at the same time. Hey, enjoy this conversation. Michael, I'm so excited about the opportunity to talk with you today. Geez, I can't believe we haven't personally met before.
No, I was so amazed by your background, frankly, and I was shocked that our paths had never crossed.
Well, here we are, and I'm so excited. There's so much we're going to talk about. But you know, this first conversation probably isn't so much a question as it does tee up a conversation that I really wanted to have with you. Now, your book is called Time to Get Tough. And we're going to talk about it a little bit later in this conversation. I'm just so fascinated by what the very last line of a book is. And the last line of your book is, I know you can do this because I did. I personally love that because my story suggests that if I could do it, a lot of people could do it who think they
Right.
could as well. Identifying the that, what the that is. But I want you to just share your approach about how you teach young people how they can go into business. I mean, you even compare starting a cookie business to starting a lemonade stand for kids. And I know this isn't a question, but I really just want you to talk about it because I think your book so beautifully messages what seems to be giving a lot of people courage and also helping them to see how they can remove some of the risks and not be afraid so much of failure.
Well, I think that one of the things I always talk with young people about, and older people as well, because people today are having careers well into their 60s and 70s. But what I always talk about is the fact that success and failure is like a highway. I mean, it's easy to slip to one side or the other and understand that some of the things that may not go wrong are the real lessons that we can learn in how to go forward. Because most of the time, if things go really smooth, you're patting yourself on the back and don't have time to really reflect on why did it go smooth. But when something goes wrong, if you can take personal responsibility and understand what you're part of that failure or that opportunity not going the way you expected, that's where you learn. That's how you can succeed, is knowing that you're going to make a mistake, but hopefully not make the same mistakes. And so, with young people, I mean, look when I started the cookie business with $8,000 with my father. I mean, and young people always say, well, $8,000 was probably a lot of money back in 1977. And I always say $8,000 was never a lot of money to start a business. And everyone tried to discourage us from going into the business because it was such a crazy new business. And but we knew we had a plan for success. We knew we had all the right things that we had thought through. We knew we were going to probably make some mistakes, not some of the ones we made, but we were very tenacious in wanting to go forward. And I think that's the hardest thing for people to do is take that first step and say, I'm going to do this. I'm going to try. So, that to me is just understanding that, you know, I guess that's why I love Nike. I love that slogan. Just do it. I mean, it's really the truth. Just do it. And if things don't go exactly the way you expected them to, make the changes necessary to make it right.
Geez, getting into your career as a business leader is really interesting because you do talk a lot about overcoming obstacles in your book. And I'm excited to talk about your childhood and everything else in a few minutes. But, let's just take care of something that I know is really important to you. And that is your long history of supporting veterans and addressing the failures our society has and how we treat veterans. Now, this is something I also deeply care about. And in our company, we are vigorously involved in not just hiring veterans, but also supporting veteran-owned businesses and spouses and families of veterans. So, Michael, if you will, just share a few minutes and tell us how you came to care so deeply about this specific cause. Was there any particular moment that made you realize the importance of this, or any series of moments? You are passionate and successful in your support of veterans. And I'm going to hold up your book because, I think when you say time to get tough, veterans really exemplify that. And I don't think I've ever held a book up in a podcast. This one just touched me that much.
Well,
Veterans, veterans.
well, let me just say that I'm actually on my way back to Atlanta. I have 4 talks next week. I have 7 talks next week, but I have 4 talks specifically to veterans groups. And I will honestly say that even though I have a family history, I'm named after a veteran that died in World War One. My uncle Bob was a Marine and was at Iwo Jima during the Second World War. Honestly, I didn't know a lot about veterans. I really hear constantly politicians talking about the military budget and how much they care about veterans. But in 1997, when I made the decision to run for the U.S. Senate,
Mhm.
I was literally in my campaign office, and a general from Georgia set up a meeting with me. And I thought the meeting would last at the most 15 minutes. He walked into my office, he laid a book down on my desk, and the title of it was Promises Made, Promises Broken.
Ha.
And what I
Mhm.
thought would be a 15-minute meeting turned into an all day meeting. He took me from my office, took me to a Veterans Affairs meeting, took me to a bunch of just veterans owned businesses, to veterans groups that were trying to help each other. And by the time I was done in that day, I realized there's a big difference between the military budget and the veterans budget. The veterans
Mhm.
budget, I found out, had basically been cut every year since Korea. Every year
Wow.
been cut. Benefits have been realigned and readjusted and basically have been changed so dramatically in the way veterans are treated. And while we hear politicians constantly talking about how we love our veterans, don't let it fool you. They may love them, but they don't take care of them. And it's to me, it's so sad. And that's one of the reasons after I lost that election, I struggled for a long time since 1998 trying to figure out what could we do? What could I, I've gone out and talked with veterans. I've gone out and met with disabled veterans, telling my own personal story of recovery. And, but I knew I wanted to try to do more, and we can't do everything. And so my wife and I decided that education was probably the most important thing, that we would have at least the kind of resources to help. And this veteran scholarship fund, all the proceeds from my book, all the royalties from my book, all honorariums I receive for speaking, all of it goes into this veterans fund to help veterans when their GI Bill runs out. It helps them finish their education. And we, we're very proud to have been able to do this. I raise money for it independently of the money we've put in. And I just hope that, and I so appreciate, and I read your own involvement with veterans, and it's really sad. It gets me very emotionally when I think about it because no one, including us, we can't do what the government could do, and they don't do it.
Well, my family is filled with veterans and actively serving members of the military right now as well. And so I think we have to go beyond reverence and we have to get relevant to how we are supporting them. And you're certainly doing that, Michael. Um, Michael, you've had 4 successful exits in business and many other successes in your life. So I think naturally it's interesting for our audience to hear about your failures or whether you've even seen them as failures. Now, I purposefully don't get into politics much on this podcast. Um, but I think your care for veterans helped inspire you in politics, as you just talked about. And, 26 years ago, you're not new to this. You actually ran for Congress in 1996 against Newt Gingrich and then for Senate in 1998. You didn't win either of those races in the general election. Do you see those as failures or successes in some way or both? Again, I'm not asking you to be political in your answer. That's a big move, and you did it twice. How do you see it? How do you read it? And how do you teach it? Do you teach it, see it, feel it as a failure or a success in either or both of those instances?
Well, here's what I would say. It's still one of the most disappointing moments in my life because I was running for the right reasons. I was not running to get reelected. I was not running to have a new career. I was really running to try to have someone in Washington that would represent the people of the district and the state and just try to do the right thing. If I didn't get reelected by trying to do the right thing, that was okay. It was disappointing, but again, I feel like I've been very involved in community service way before I ever decided to run for office. My wife and I have been very involved in education, and so it felt like a normal extension of community service to take the plunge to run for office. I never thought I'd ever run for office, and it wound up happening. But here's what I would say about that. You know, I have lived the American dream, and to me, when someone like me, a poor kid from Miami, that grew up virtually having to work 3 jobs all the way from junior high school through high school.
I think
Uh,
your first job was at age 13, wasn't it?
yes, they're full-time jobs. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And and to have the opportunity in this country to run for the House of Representatives and then for the US Senate just speaks to what an incredible country this is. And um, knowing the outcome, if I had to do, and knowing what financial resources my family and I use, and knowing how much pressure it was on our families, and again, knowing the outcome, would I do it again in a heartbeat? Because because you're when what other country does someone like me have the opportunity to go out and talk about veterans benefits in a room of 30 or 40,000 people who are actually listening to you? There's no place in the world that I know of that easily happens except here in America.
Well, you talk about here in America and the opportunities we have in business, politically, and regardless of whether one is affiliated with a particular party or a particular interest or not, this still is a very new democracy and it is proving itself over and over again. Now, I shared with you already that I'm not a big fan of speaking about politics publicly, um, especially in a partisan way. Before we move from your political activism, I will ask you 2 things. Would you ever consider getting in politics again? And what is your take on where politics are today in this country? Where do you think we're headed? Do you see anything positive happening, particularly in Georgia, where you were a candidate?
Well, one, I would not consider it again. I feel like a lot of things. There is a time and a season for everything, and there was definitely that was my time and my season to think about an actual position in politics. I really don't want to. Honestly, there's no way to answer the second part of that question other
Hmm.
than to say I think this is a very frightening time in American history, and I hope that um, in November when people come out to vote, they understand that this is America is an experiment. People forget that this was an experiment of democracy. This was an experiment of freedom of speech. This is all different than anywhere in the world. And this experiment has lasted a long time. And I hope that when people go to the polls, they'll just understand that this is very fragile and that we've got to get people talking to each other again. And we've got to find a way where we can disagree without being completely disagreeable. And I'm very worried. I think like a lot of people are. I don't. I think again this is an experiment, and let's hope it goes on for another 200 years or 300 years. But it's been tested before, and in the past, it's come back around, and democracy has survived. And I hope that we'll see it continue to survive.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And, earlier I mentioned your business exits. I'll just speak about them quickly here for our family listening. You sold the Great American Cookie Company in 1998, which you co founded in 1977. You started a charter bank. You grew it to 350 million US dollars and sold it. And then you were the CEO of Caribou Coffee, which you doubled in size before selling it. You had the Brand Bank Holding Company, and this is just an incredible career. It all started though with cookies. You and Arthur Karp started that business with $4,000 each and a small loan. It sounds a lot like my own story. How did you
Yeah.
meet Arthur, and what did you think? What do you think makes for a great collaboration for two co-founders when starting a business? Because that's where you and I differ. We have very similar stars, very similar principles, uh, but you had a partner.
I did have a partner, and we had a terrific relationship. We handled different aspects of the business. In many ways, we were very much alike in what our careers were like, but what we did and what our skills really were very different. I was marketing, I was sales, I was operations. I had to become finance, which I had not really done very well at in my past career because I was a sales guy, and it's like I didn't have to worry about that. I just had to go out and sell merchandise. But when we started the cookie company, Arthur took over franchise sales and the legal relationships surrounding that and real estate, finding locations. And I took over every other aspect of the business. We used to say that Arthur would give birth to the child and I would raise the child. That's how we looked at our business.
Well,
And
it is a good business marriage, right?
yeah, it is. And we got into terrible arguments. And with 50-50 partners is probably the worst arrangement anybody can ever have because, there's no legal parameter to have the last word. But the agreement we made with each other in the very beginning is that we will argue to the hilt, but whoever is responsible for the area we're discussing, they get the final word. They
Mhm,
have the extra vote.
mhm.
And it worked for, you know, the whole, I guess, 20 years, 21 years. And there were many times I didn't think it was going to work because of some of the disagreements we had. But at the end of the day, we were we were very good franchisors. We ran a franchise company. We felt like our franchisees were our partners. We treated them very well. I'm still very close to many of them that were franchisees when I was there. And we had, it's a David and Goliath relationship, and unfortunately, a lot of people want to be more Goliath and not really understand David. And we were not like that. We considered them our partners. All of the royalties that came into the business, all of that money went back in supporting our franchise system. And people would say, well, then how did you make any money? Because we sold them their product. We sold them the batter, and we always sold it at a price that was not just competitive, but a price that was lower than they could ever buy it from anyone else's cookie batter. And it was a secret recipe, but they had great food costs, and any chance we had to lower their food costs, we did, and we still made plenty of money, off of the product, and that's how we made our money. We didn't worry about the 7% they were paying us in a franchise fees. We put it all back into marketing. We put it all back into area managers, into trainers in the field, to yeah, human resources people that could go out into the field and help them with their hiring and training and doing all of that. And that's how the company succeeded. And I advise people that not every partnership can be like that. And if you can have it, if you're going to have a partner, one of you probably ought to have the final vote, even if it's 49-51, because 50-50 partnerships, it is like a marriage in a lot of ways. And we know what 50% of the outcome of marriages are because no one really has the final say. And so I would just say that, if you're going to enter a partnership, you either have to have what my partner and I had as an agreement, or you set it up corporately where someone actually has the final say.
I think that's so important. And you understand that our audience, who we refer to as our family, are many of them are new to careers or new to starting businesses. And so I think that what you just shared is really important for here. And there is just one little bit you talked about that I'd love you to speak more to, and that in particular, how it frames in your thoughts or advice to people starting their businesses. You talked about partnerships, and the danger of it. Somebody has to be the shot caller. At the end, you got to know whose throat to choke, right?
Right.
You pat everybody on the back, but you choke one throat. What about people who aren't going into business in partnerships and are starting those businesses today? I happen to think, by the way, Michael, that today is one of the best times ever to start a business, even as we look around and see so much uncertainty. We've just come through 2+ years of pandemic and are still endemic. And we've looked at a lot of things. People start businesses considering many different regulations and considering many different social, economic ideologies that they work from. What's your advice to people entering business today who may see more risk than opportunity, but have that great thing or idea that they still want to take a chance with?
Well, one of the things that I would share is that there's probably never the right time to start a business.
Mm-hmm.
There's always reasons not to start a business. We started our cookie business at the highest interest rates that this country has ever seen. That got
Wow.
all the way up to over 20%. And we never even gave it a second thought as to whether someone would buy a franchise. Because why would someone put, at that time, a couple $100,000 into a business that has risk when they could buy a CD that was paying them 18 or 20% and not have any risk whatsoever? And the bottom line was, they were smart enough to know that those interest rates weren't going to stay that way forever. And we
Mm-hmm.
felt like if we had a compelling business model that could show success, that people would in fact invest in it. And it turned out to be the case. I can't even I can't even begin to describe to you all the doomsayers that were around us when we started our business, including the bank that loaned
Mm-hmm.
us a small loan, including all of the malls around Atlanta that turned us down with this stupid, crazy idea that we had. Um, I totally agree with you. I think this is an absolutely great time to be starting a business. There are so many businesses that unfortunately have disappeared. And I get this question asked all the time about disruptors, people who have
Mm-hmm.
disrupted industries. And they'll say, what do you think is the next industry to disrupt? And my answer is any disruptive business that's been around 5 to 10 years at this point and have not changed their business model, they're ready to be disrupted.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The thing that people have to recognize in starting a business, if it's a business that already exists and they've got a better way to do it, that's great. Because remember, we learn in business from our competition, and if our competition is doing really well, that's our starting point. And what the competitor has to realize is that there's always somebody standing in the wings ready to take your business away from you. No one owns their customer. You've got to be you've got to make sure that customer is going to want to come back because you've done something special for them that makes them feel like they're important to you. One of the things that's happened with the internet, and by the way, I think the internet has made opportunity for starting a business so much greater. I mean, when I think about having to struggle to find a location and get started, I mean, if I were starting the cookie company today, it would be so completely different in the way we would go about doing it. But the thing about the internet is that as good as it is for the opportunity to almost be a global company from the time you start, it also, the power of the purchase today is not in the hands of the seller. The power of the purchase today is in the consumer, because with their handheld phone, they're always on. They can talk to their friends, they can talk into a community, and it can be good or bad. And what people have to recognize today is that customer service has never been more important than it is today. Taking care of customers.
Influencers. I mean, when you think about TikTok and other platforms, influencers are dynamically not only changing the opportunities or the focus of the buyer, um, they're also reframing how companies even start up now. Companies plan for influencers as part of their business growth. So, you know, the internet, it's interesting you talk about the internet and how your business would look different if you were starting it today. I've shared the story that I felt like Judy Jetson when I got my first fax machine. It Yet it wasn't. So technology is huge for us. And most often we hear conversations about the ills of it. But I agree with you that for the entrepreneur and for the customer, the internet really does offer so many advantages when we're smart about how we approach it. And Michael, I've said often to students of business or universities as well that technology was the equalizer for me. It kind of equalized the playing field to some degree for me. So I agree with you a lot. One thing I'm really interested in is how you went from cookies to cash. But before we talk about that, I know that you were in the clothing business for 19 years prior to starting the cookie business. And you shared a story before about sitting on a plane next to somebody successful and asking for their advice to you as a young entrepreneur. Would you share with us that story here for the family, and also how you were able to take such a risk while you had a family and young children to support? Did you just know that you could make it a success, or did you fight some real doubts in doing that?
Well, let me tell you, let me tell your family the story. I had I was working for a clothing company as a sales rep, and I had fortunately won a big sales contest, and my the company flew me back to Detroit, where I was living, and first class. I had never flown first class. I barely ever flown on an airplane at that point in my life. But I was sitting next to a guy who today I'm sure would be on a private plane, but there were no private planes back then. And he was wearing a Rolex. It was the first time I ever saw one up close. And he was more interested in me. And I had a hard time even talking to him because he kept asking me questions. I was 22 at the time, and I probably looked 17 or 16, and he assumed I was. And so he's asking me all kinds of questions about my career and how I happened to be sitting up in first class. And so right as we were about to land, I turned to him. I said, "What advice would you give a young guy like me that's just starting out in the business world?" And he didn't even hesitate. He just looked at me and he said, "You know, careers are about taking risks." And he said, "Just try to take those risks as young as you possibly can be. Because the older you get, the more complicated your life's going to get. And the idea of taking risk will have so many more variables to it that you may not do it. So do it as young as you can." And that advice has stuck with me. It's the same advice I give young people today. It's so true to this day. And when I started the cookie company and took that big risk, it was the risk wasn't as great when I took it as it became,
Mm.
because I started the cookie company because I had three young kids. The clothing industry was dramatically changing. I was already traveling about 3 to 4 days a week, but the industry was moving to Asia, which would mean that I was going to have to start traveling 3 or 4 weeks a month. And I didn't want to be gone from my family that long. I wanted to stay in the clothing business, but I wanted to find if there was some other business and just find a way of being able to stay at home more. And so when I got the idea to start the cookie company, and there's obviously a long story about how that came about, I thought it would be a business that my wife and my partner Arthur and his wife would run and do until I actually figured out what I was going to do for the
Oh,
rest of
I love your story about the first day of your cookie company. You know,
it.
Michael, looking back, the way you tell the story is almost like a comedy of errors, but surely that day you felt discouraged. How you deal with getting knocked down seems to be such a compelling message. Go on, share it with us. And particularly, how did you keep from feeling defeated in that small failure, that series of small failures?
Well, so quickly, the first day that we started the cookie business, we got there early in the morning, put the first batch of cookies in. We had no money for marketing. We went out into the neighborhoods and gave all the mall employees a flyer that basically said that from 9 o'clock in the morning till 12 noon, we would give away free cookies. And so we got to the store early in the morning, and we got the store prepped, ready to go.
Those used to be paper flyers, right?
Right, just paper flash. Yeah, old school, totally
Old
old.
school, old school.
Yeah. And the trick was that we'd give away free cookies from 9 to 12, not knowing if anyone would even show up for free cookies. But about 8:30 in the morning, we looked out into the mall, and there were probably, I don't know, 70, 80 people standing out there. We were very excited that somebody had shown up, and we had a big revolving oven that held about 300 cookies to bake at a time, and it had like a Ferris wheel in it with a window on the front that was pressed up against the gate of the store, so people out in the mall could actually watch the cookies bake
And smell the
and
deliciousness.
smell the delicious smell. And 15 minutes after we put those cookies in the oven, they reached this gorgeous golden brown color, and people out in the mall watched the cookies go from kind of creamy white looking like ice cream scoops to flattening out till they finally became these golden brown, beautiful cookies. And inside the store, all the employees, we decided this was our big moment to start our business, that we'd all put our hand on the oven door in this symbolic gesture to start our business. And all the employees in the store consisted of my partner Arthur and his wife Susan, my wife Donna, my mother Lee, their son Billy. We had no paid employees. We all put our hand on that oven door, opened it up, looked inside at these magnificent golden brown chocolate chip cookies sitting on their trays at 350 degrees. And it was exactly at that moment we realized we forgot to buy oven mitts. And we had no rags in the store, no paper towels. We had no way to get the cookies out of the oven. The people out in the mall had no idea what was going on, but as the cookies went round and round, turning from this golden brown to darker brown, to eventually catching on fire inside the oven, smoke poured out of our oven into Park Lane Hosiery, which we had a shared air conditioning system. People were running out into the mall screaming because they thought the mall was on fire. The fire department was called out, and Jeff Weil, who was the mall manager, who took this big risk on two guys out of the clothing business with no money and no experience, could have broken our lease right there and we would have been done. Instead, he just looked inside and asked, "Is this what it's going to be like every day, guys?" And we try to sell him on, how great we were one more time, and he just turned around and walked away in disgust. We didn't get open that day. We had to go out into the neighborhood, give them out new flyers. They were big. I remember the flyer like it was yesterday. It was a yellow piece of paper with the big word in black, "Oops," and basically the same flyer saying, "Come tomorrow, and we'll give you free cookies from 9 to 12." And the story is funny today, but you're right. It was not funny on that day. We realized how little we knew about this business, that even though we had planned this for almost a year,
Mhm.
and checked all the check marks on what you need to do to be in this business, we had checked them all and thought, we had gotten everything, and we knew at that moment that there were probably a lot of other things we had missed, but we were never going to not remember oven mitts. And we did open the next day, and at 8:30 in the morning, when we looked out into the mall, there were hundreds of people out there. And they weren't there for free cookies. They were there to see what these two idiots were going to do today. Then maybe today they would just finish the job and burn them all down. But we opened with great success. In our first 30 days of business, we needed to do $12,000 to break even. In fact, we did over $30,000. In those first 30 days, we became the highest revenue cookie company in America on an annual basis. And we didn't have to go hat in hand begging for locations. We had people, coming from all over, offering us locations. We had people wanting to buy franchises. Everything that you would think would be in place for the company to be a success seemed to be there. And then 6 weeks after we started the company, I woke up in a hospital with two doctors standing over my bed telling me I'd been involved in a near fatal motorcycle accident and I would probably never walk again unaided. But considering the alternative of not waking up at all, I felt like, well, that's okay. I mean, I'll be all right. But it took away every other option I had. This was before the ADA. You
Yeah.
couldn't you couldn't go look for a job in the C-suite like I was used to on a walker. You wouldn't even get an appointment back then on crutches. You know,
And Michael, 9 months later, you had an experience with your daughter that finally made you realize what a disability you were actually encountering. I mean, obviously, you were blessed to recover. You're talking with me today, and you're walking again. But some people suffer accidents or misfortunes that they don't recover from. Do you think this experience gave you a special kind of empathy? You talk about your care for veterans. Is there anything that you would say to somebody who has experienced this sort of life changing trauma? And I'm particularly invested in listening to your answers because although I've been accused of being a Pollyanna throughout my life, I've had challenges, but right now, my son, who's president of our staffing organizations, he had a surgery last week on his Achilles. He completely tore it, and he said, when you go through something yourself, your empathy radar really goes up. But I'm trying to learn a lot more than that. There's some people who are going to live with their disabilities for life. Mine is intermittent to healing. What sort of life-changing traumas that people are going through you can't speak to, but the type of hope you can give them based on fundamental pragmatism and your own story is important here. Please.
I probably could have had a much longer answer than I will now.
Uh-huh.
Max Cleland, who's a former senator from Georgia, was a very, very good friend of mine, and he was a triple amputee. And he wrote a book, and the name of the book came from another quote, which is stronger in the broken places. And
Mm,
that
mm.
that to me is what I think for myself. I've had a lot of setbacks, and I think stronger in the broken places says it all, because if you can overcome that adversity, you are stronger in those broken places because you're smarter. And if it's in other words, if it's that kind of a setback, or if it's an actual physical problem that you actually recover from, you are stronger in the broken places. I
Wow.
never imagined in my life my motorcycle accident was by far the changing point of my life. Recovering from that accident, setting 3 world records across the country on a bicycle, knowing that I would never think, I knew at the moment when I rode across the country for the third time that I would never look at anything in my life ever the same again, because what I had to go through to accomplish that, there's nothing you could throw in front of me that was going to be harder than that. And so I was stronger in the broken places, but not just in my physical legs or limbs or arms or shoulders. I was stronger mentally. And mentally it's the same thing. I mean, if you, whatever it takes to make you stronger in those broken places, if you can take that and go forward with it, it's amazing the things you'll be able to accomplish. And the
Michael,
bottom line is, and if it doesn't go well, at least you tried, And that was the incident with my daughter. In 9 months after my accident, I didn't know if I'd get any better, but I knew I had to do something different than what doctors were telling me. And the thing that people don't realize, in 1977, there weren't the kind of there were no Lifetime Fitnesses. There weren't all the gyms that are out there. The marathon wasn't as big as it is. The world was different. At 33 years old, basically, if doctors could get me on a couple of canes, what the hell, you're not going to do much anyway.
old school, old school.
It's all old school. It was all old school, and the
Well,
world's just
Michael, I believe that people learn how to be strong because of those hardships and difficulties in their lives when they have the attitude that you do. Please share a little bit about your childhood and having to give up your dog at 10 years old. I mean, that's a hardship to a 10-year-old kid as well. Uh, uh, Also, though, let's talk about how that experience shaped you, how you look back now on your parents. Do you appreciate what those hard times taught you that you had in your childhood? Or have you sometimes felt any resentment toward your father? We're having a real conversation with family here. And I want to know, do you think it shaped what kind of father you became to your own children? A lot of questions in that.
wow.
Start with your childhood.
So my dad, my dad had to quit school when he was 11 to support his family. I mean, this is like tragic. And
Mm,
I don't know that I ever appreciated that until I was older and then had to do it kind of myself at 13 to help my family. But my dad, literally 11, was the sole support of his family. And we had a pretty good, I would say middle class to upper middle class life until I was 10. I came home from school. There was a panel truck sitting in front of our house, which
mhm,
we had lost. My dad had gone bankrupt, and all of our furniture and plates and all the stuff we had was packed up. My dad informed me that we were in bankruptcy and that we were moving. I had no knowledge of this prior to coming home. And my dog, Lucky, a little black cocker spaniel, was sitting in my red wagon with her food and bowls. And my parents had made arrangements for me to give Lucky away to a kid that lived up the street, a younger kid. And because where we were going to move to an apartment, didn't allow didn't allow dogs. And so I remember that moment as I'm saying it, just like it was again yesterday. And I couldn't cry because I was about to see this younger kid, and I had to be tough. And so I gave him my wagon and my dog, and I walked back, and I thought I could. And yeah, was I upset? I was very upset. But bankruptcy to me meant you lose your house, you lose your dog. That's what it seemed like it meant.
wow.
But we moved into a pretty nice apartment and we had all our stuff. And, as time goes on, like as a kid, you get over stuff. And it didn't seem that different, other than the fact I had to find, go to a new school and I had to make new friends. But 3 years after my dad went personally bankrupt and always thought that he would recover, we lived a lifestyle that was higher than we should. My dad was in such debt again that they were garnishing his wages so badly that he was barely bringing home a paycheck. And so we sold everything we had, all our furniture, everything, china, silverware, everything got sold. And literally in the middle of the night, we moved from Buffalo, New York, to Miami, which in Florida is and was a debtor's state, and there's no garnishing. There may be now, but there wasn't then. And again, my dad thought that this would give him the opportunity with a clean slate to start over. But when I woke up that morning in this less than 300 square foot apartment with one bedroom, sharing a bedroom with my sister, my parents were sleeping on a screened porch. This is Miami Beach, 100-degree weather, no air conditioning. It was really a really bad place. But I woke up in the morning, realized now I know what bankruptcy is. You lose everything. And I had two choices to make. I could accept it as a temporary position, or I could get a job and try to help my family. And I made the choice to get a job. And I will say right now, I was not happy about it because I knew when I made that decision that my teenage years were going to be very different than what I had expected them to be. And I didn't know that to really help my family was not going to require getting one job, it was getting three jobs. And I wound up, getting a job as a beach boy. I wound up becoming an apprentice to a handyman. I wound up finally at 13, got a great job working for a guy named Irving Settler at a clothing store, and I gave up the beach boy job, but still kept the apprentice job on the weekends. And I would honestly say, until I started my first business and went bankrupt myself, that I never really appreciated what my dad had gone through. And my dad and I, there was never, there may have been at some point some resentment that I didn't realize I had. But when I went through that same turmoil myself and thought about how bad that had to be for my father, we were very very close and remained very close until the day he passed.
Did
And
it shape how you fathered your own children?
there's no doubt. Yeah, I didn't spoil them. I'll tell you that. Uh, I didn't. I didn't. It was tempting, but I didn't. We never took a, I'm sitting right now in a recreational vehicle, and
Uh-huh.
we've had ever we started out taking our kids every summer camping, and eventually we wound up getting an RV. But the truth is, we never, I wouldn't say never, but we took them occasionally on some exciting kind of trip. But most our kids worked. If they in the summertime when they were old enough to work, they had to get a job, and because I wanted them to understand the value of themselves, not just the value of work, but the value of themselves, and have a good work ethic and understand,
Wow.
what life could be like. And we could have given them a much different life, but I've watched friends of mine who have done that and watched how their kids have turned out not so great. And so, I've got three adult children that I think, are all very accomplished in their own way.
We are blessed in that way, Michael. Bernie and my two adult children are just the best friends ever to me in a very, and we still have a parent-child relationship, adult-child relationship. As my mom reminds me, they're no longer your babies, but they're still your kids. So,
Right.
your book came out in September of 2021, and proceeds from that book are shared to Kennesaw State University. And you've done that in an amazing way. Talk about how you feel about higher education, and in particularly about that university. What's so important about that for you?
Well, Kennesaw State University, I've been on the board now since 1990. I feel like Al Pacino, they just keep pulling me back and pulling me back. But it's an incredible university. When I went on the board, we had about 8,000 students. We're now the second largest university in the state. We've got 43,000 students, and been recognized literally in America and all over the world for some of the academic achievement that the university has had. My wife and I endowed the business school in 1994, and it bears my name. And just as I talk about in my book about the three W's,
Mm-hmm.
work, wisdom, and wealth, that a lot of times people write a check and they and walk away. But the truth is that nonprofits of all kind need that wisdom, because a lot of the people that can write a check can offer wisdom to a nonprofit that they frankly can't afford to hire. And
Mm-hmm.
so I've stayed involved with Kennesaw State University since 1990, very involved in the business school. And when I wrote the book I wrote, I didn't write it for to boast about my career. I felt like, and the book is just full of things that went wrong, and that's really the big lesson of the book. The big lesson of the book is, success is just not a straight line, and it's going to have all. I mean, I guess some people get lucky. Thank you. I guess some people get lucky, but for me, what I've seen in my career and around friends of mine who've been successful, everybody faces things that don't go right. And that's where you really can learn. So
If there's
all the,
one thing, Michael, if there's one thing you want someone to take away from your book, what would it be? If you only could give them the one thing in this book that they absolutely have to take away.
well, you've just got to get out there and do it. I mean,
Nike again, Nike
yeah,
again.
yeah, just do it. I mean, there back a long time ago, there was a whole thing called excellence. There were books written about excellence, and it
Mhm.
was all about having a positive attitude and get out. And what I've said for years is you can have the most positive attitude in the world, but if you don't get out of your house and do something, or now at least do it online, if you don't create something and work at something, nothing's going to happen. Anybody who thinks that that you got to have this right moment to do it, there is no right moment. You create the right moment. You understand that there's going to be things that don't go right, but you've got a vision, and you just got to keep following it through.
Well,
And
Your book really does lift people up and motivate them, Michael. I mean, you teach about resilience, persistence, and hard work, as you said. Um, these are things that I care about and teach, very deeply to not only my employees, but uh, I'm paid to talk with people about these things. And we have a lot of young entrepreneurs and aspiring entrepreneurs who are listening right now to you. Is there one habit or trait you think is most important for them to consider as they're starting or growing their businesses early on? And also, is there a habit or trait you think is bad for entrepreneurs to focus on that you can give them advice to that helps them ignore or avoid?
I'm not sure there's a word, but I would just say that fear is probably the word. You always talk about people are afraid of change, people are afraid of this, people are afraid of all kinds of things. And I think the only way you get over fear is by taking it head on. And people talk about they're afraid to be in the dark. So how do you get over being in the dark? Get in the dark. I think if people have an inkling to start a career, go back to school, whatever it might be, the thing of it is you have to just find a way to not be so afraid. And as I said, I think you and I talked about this earlier. The
Mhm,
flip side of success is failure. And
mhm.
if you know that going in, then that gets you over a lot of fear because you know that it can happen. I mean, things are not going to necessarily go as smoothly as you'd expect. And I just think, being afraid, you just where will someone once said this to me. It was really great. They were asking me about something that I wanted to do, and I said, well, that could take 5 years to do that. And they looked at me and they said, well, why won't you do it? I said, well, because it take 5 years. And he said, well, the 5 years are going to go by one way or the other. And I was
Yep,
like,
y'all, we just went through over 2 years of
right,
pandemic. In some ways it felt like it felt as though it were going to last forever, and yet
ever.
some of us, we look back and we think, wow, that was 2 years already. In 1999 you became the chair of the Georgia Film Board, where you served for 4 years. During that time and since then, the number of movies and shows that are shot in Georgia have just increased dynamically. Now, I know you worked at a very high level, so you didn't necessarily have involvement on a project to project basis, but is there any one film project, Michael, that got shot in Georgia that you feel particularly proud or fond of because you had a little bit to do with it being there?
Well, let me just go back a little bit because, honestly, you've talked about some of the successes I've had in business, and I appreciate that. But the truth is, the greatest success I've had in business was those 4 years of running the film commission because the film
Wow.
business in Georgia was dead. It was dead. It was done. And Jimmy Carter had started it was one of the first film commissions in the United States. Jimmy Carter had started it, and other governors just never picked up on it, and it just kind of died. And so when I took it over, when Roy Barnes was governor, and this was right after I lost my Senate race, and he asked me if I'd like to get involved in the administration. I asked him the question. I said, "Do we still have a film commission?" And he said, "Yeah, we do." And I said, "Well, is it active?" And he said, "I don't know." And he got back to me and said, "Nope, they haven't had a board meeting in like 10 years."
Mm.
And so I said, "Well, I'd like to run the film commission, and I'd like to put together a 40-person board, because that was the criteria." And that's what we did. And I got experts from all areas of movies to be on my board. Pat Mitchell, who at that time was running Turner Broadcasting, she came on my board. I mean, I had a group of incredible people, and we met in an ideation meeting to figure out how we could resurrect the business. I flew all over the state. I flew all over the country to meet with producers to try to make them aware of why Georgia was such a great place to film. I'm not going to go into all of it, but the bottom line is, Georgia is now the number one feature film location in the world. $13 billion of economic impact from a
Tyler
hundred.
Perry has certainly benefited from a lot of the
Oh
work
yeah,
done and bringing and leaning and giving forward from it.
exactly. And if you ask me about one movie, I'll tell you the one movie that stands out most in my mind.
Which one?
Well, it would be The Legend of Bagger Vance, which was
Ah,
a Robert Redford film. I got to meet Robert Redford, or as we call him, Bob. And I got to meet him and had dinner with him a couple of times. And that movie, which was supposed to be filmed in North Carolina, was filmed in Georgia.
my home state, yeah. And I'm very familiar with the story of
And
Bagger.
and I convinced him to have a second premiere of the movie, which I knew would get a lot of attention from other producers of movies if he would come and do that, and he did. We wound up having a second premiere in Savannah, and it got national attention and started this ball rolling of getting other producers and directors and filmmakers to come to Georgia and at least take a look. And then we passed the first tax incentive, and now they've passed the second one, which we had written, never got around to doing it because I was just there for the 4 years. But now it's got a life of its own, and but I would say that movie is so meaningful to me because I think it put a focus on Georgia because of Robert
Mm,
Redford's reputation. It got people thinking about Georgia again, or as we
okay,
like to say, Georgia on
so
my mind.
so look, I'll let you off the hook for not choosing one of the Medea movies, okay, that have come much later than then. What I will keep you on the hook though about is I know you love fly fishing, and were there more than one reasons why you decided to make your home in Jackson Hole?
Well, I I'm a big fly fisherman, and I became a fly fisherman. I had a partner in my last clothing company who was a fly fisherman. I was a spin fisherman. I'm not going to go into the whole story, but
Mm-hmm.
basically, when he died, and he died young, he left me a fly rod and some flies with a note in a fly box that said, "This changed my life. I hope it'll change yours." I thought fly fishing was like the dumbest thing you could possibly do. But as I felt very obligated to at least, it took me a year to take his fly rod and go out and actually try it. And the first time I did it, I was hooked, figuratively hooked. And I started reading about it and learning more about it. And it was kind of that quality of life thing with my own children about talking about where we took them on vacation. It was
Mm.
always about traveling the United States and going to national parks and seeing scenery. And then I wound up having this connection to water and water quality, and learning that trout are an indicator species of how the environment is doing. So I became very active in that. And it did change my life. And I wound up, my wife and I, when we were able to do it, we bought a home in Montana,
Mm-hmm.
and we started visiting Jackson Hole about 20 years ago on a pretty regular basis. And we just, at one point, just decided from a quality of life of waking up every day and seeing the Grand Tetons, it never gets old. And you know, I hope that people are listening to this will understand when I say it. Don't come to Jackson Hole. Don't come anymore. We got enough people. We don't, it's big enough. It's big enough.
The
But
hole is big enough.
yeah, it's. I mean, I've been very fortunate. I've traveled the world. I don't know of any place more beautiful than Jackson Hole. And
Well, now you know I'm going to have to disobey you on that. A lot of what's in your book, and I'm holding it up again because I have just loved it. Check my podcast out. I don't hold books up. I just love it. You can see that it has lots of clips and underlines in it. Yeah, I'm still a student at 70 years of age. I'm still learning, and I'm so thrilled to learn from you. Michael, my commitment, this is the last conversation point I'm going to ask you to cover before we go to 4 for 4. And it's this. Now, you've had a number of David and Goliath type stories in your life, and learning to walk again is one of the most inspiring ones. We hit on it a little bit that, you were told you never would, and now you're with your family, obviously walking and having a nice time at it. But you're also a cancer survivor. And you've set records for crossing the United States on a bicycle. Not only that, some of those records are still standing. When things get really tough for you and you just want to give up, or others might want to give up, what do you think is the thing that just keeps you going?
well, look, I haven't talked about my wife. Um, there's no doubt that my life has been saved 4 times, and I talk about it in my book. And the last person I think is the most important person that's saved my life was my wife. And I don't mean saved my life with life and death, but stepped in and changed the course of my life. And I've had 4 people that have done that for me throughout my life. And I
Mm.
just don't. I just say that we don't go through this by ourselves. You know, maybe some people do. I can think of one in particular, but um, most of us need friends, need family, need you know uh, some confidant, whatever. But for me, I mean, my wife Donna has been there for me through every single up and down that we've had through our, by the way, 50 years of marriage, which we just celebrated in August. And but I think that, and I don't know that this is so much about having a positive attitude, but when I had cancer, it never even dawned on me that I wouldn't beat it. My attitude was, this is just another thing being thrown at me to see how strong I could be. And I got through it. And I've been 7, 8 years now clean. And I think that for people, I don't I guess for me the answer just simply is I've got a lot of great support behind me. Um, I think I've carried with me from great mentors, including my boss Irving and my dad, um, that gave me confidence that if I worked hard and if I was persistent and tenacious, that I could get through it. And I think at some point when you're young, you have to think about it and make yourself do it. But at some point, after enough things have been thrown at you and you've managed to get through them, it just becomes natural. It just becomes part of your DNA. And I listen, I feel very, very fortunate to have the life that I've had. And I want other people to experience the same thing. That's why I wrote my book. I want them to understand that if I did this, you can do it. If I did it, you can do it. I have a young man right now that's writing a book that just, I was honored. He read my book and asked me if I would write the forward to his introduction, rather, the introduction to his book, which I'm in the process of doing. And because somehow my life story touched his life, and he has given me more credit than I deserve in the way his career has worked out, because he's just a very good person, very hardworking. But if I had written my book and that was the only person that I ever heard from, it would have been worth writing the book because that's why I
Wow.
wrote it.
Wow.
So,
Well, it's certainly as I said, I've been around for a while, and it's certainly changed my life in a positive way. I just love it. I love it, love it, love it. Hey, look, let's play a little bit. Let's go 4 for 4.
okay.
All righty. So I'm going to ask you 4 questions, Michael, to which you'll give me 4 answers. And obviously, we're playing, so there are no right or wrong answers. The first question, you get to invite 4 guests to dinner. They can be from any time in history, past to or alive to present. No futuristic created folk. Who's coming to dinner?
My first boss, Irving
And why?
Sattler.
And why? And why?
Okay. My first boss, Irving Sattler, because he was the first person that taught me about business, and not so much even about business, but taught me about that I had value and made me realize I had value. Because at that point in my life, I wasn't sure I had any value. uh, Second person would probably be Linda Silverman, who I talk about in my book,
Right.
who saved my life physically when I was drowning in Lake Erie, jumping off a pier when a guy jumped on top of me. I would love to be able to just thank her and let her know how that one incident, how it changed my life, and hopefully
Mhm.
my life has changed other people's lives in some way. I guess the third person would be a guy named Tad Kaminsky, who I worked for at Male Jeans and hired me when I was very young and gave me an opportunity to work and wound up not only becoming a sales manager running the state of Michigan, but I wound up becoming national sales manager of the company, learning the inside of manufacturing, and wound up starting my own clothing company because of his involvement. And then the fourth person that I would probably, I guess, invite to dinner would um, probably be Zell Miller, believe it, or my wife, because my wife will always come to dinner. But outside of my wife would be a guy named Zell Miller, who was governor of Georgia, and um, someone I became very close friends with that created the Hope Scholarship, which I think has been a very big inspiration to me. It was the first lottery that was set up in the United States, the first one ever in the United States that was set up, and the sole purpose of the lottery was that all of the money would go to scholarships for higher education and for um, trade schools, so that you could go to school based. If you maintain a B average, at that time it was a B average. I think it's higher now, but if you maintained the B average and B average all the way through school, everything was paid for: books, tuition, and all of it. It's changed somewhat once people got their hands on the money after Zell was gone. But the fact is, I'd love to sit back down with Zell and talk to him about the people I know whose lives were changed by what he did. And he did that. Betty Siegel was the first female president of a university in the state of Georgia, and she
Mhm.
was at Kennesaw State University. And Betty Siegel had a great line. She said that nothing will make you feel better than changing the lives of people you'll never meet.
Wow, that I've never heard it worded that way. It certainly speaks to my heart, and I have to say it's a truth. It is a truth. Um, let's go 2 for 4. What
Sure.
4 things are you listening to right now that you would recommend to our family, and why? Music, podcast, and why?
Um, Four things I'm listening to right now.
Really want to hear your music, Michael. Really want to hear your music.
Honestly, I'm an old school music guy. I love jazz, and I love old jazz. I like Miles Davis, Ahmad Jamal, you
Oh my
know,
God. Oh my
yeah.
God. And we're calling it old. I guess it is old, but it's so current.
You know what I'm saying? I mean,
Do you
I
still have the vinyl? Do you have vinyl?
I do, and
Oh, mm,
the vibe in old jazz to me, I hate uh, synthesizer. I hate any of that stuff. I was very fortunate. I became very, very close friends with Isaac Hayes.
uh-huh.
He lived in Atlanta. I mean, he used to come to Thanksgiving dinner at my home every year, and
Never can say goodbye.
he and I we were such good friends, and so maybe that's part of it. It's like I had. That's like to me, Isaac Hayes was the end of all that great music.
Yeah,
Everything.
because old school jazz was happy, hopeful. Today, a lot of stuff is sad, hopeful. Like we're gonna hope, we're gonna believe, we're gonna keep our chin up, and we're doing it from a really painful, doubting place. Old jazz was it was hopeful. It was happy, hopeful. So yeah, I'm with you there.
Okay,
Okay.
so that's music, movies. My wife and I are big movie people. We probably watch five movies a week. We don't watch a lot of network television anymore. We watch more movies,
Mm-hmm.
and there's so much coming at you now. It's tough. But we watch honestly. I mean, I probably maybe people not want to hear this. We watched all the great stuff on TV like Breaking Bad and
Mm-hmm.
Game of Thrones and all of that. There's so much great entertainment out there today. So I'm watching that. I still wind up reading a lot of books now. I read them online with on an iPad as opposed to real books. But every once in a while, I'll pull like right now. I'm rereading a book I read many years ago called The Reckoning that was written by David Halberstam.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Great history writer, but this book reads like a novel, and I'm rereading it because I just happen to. It's one of my favorite books.
Well,
Um,
one of the 4 for 4 is what 4 books are you reading that you recommend and why? So you've given us David Halberstam's book, The Reckoning. What are the
Reckoning. I
other
mean,
three?
three other books. Wait a minute. So are we in another question?
Yeah, because the second question was, what are you listening to?
Yeah. Well, I would say old jazz. I mean, I
Yeah.
drive constantly, and then I'm also a big 60s. I'm sorry, a big 70s um, music. Bob Seger. You
Mm-hmm.
know, old time rock and roll. I mean, that music speaks to me. Okay, so I would say that's also listening.
We could
And
hang out a little bit. You tell
yeah,
you
it
to invite
sounds
me
like
over
it.
to
I
come
like it.
back in. When I
Yeah.
come back, tell her to invite me over.
So the four books are probably old books. I mean, it would be The Reckoning by David Halberstam. It would be Execution, which was written by Larry Bossidy. Um, Probably, oh God, another book. So many great books. Oh, Steve Jobs,
Mm-hmm.
story of Steve Jobs' life. That was I can't remember even now who wrote it.
Mm-hmm.
That
Mm-hmm.
is an excellent book. And then I love that book actually. I've read that book more than once about him. He was an amazing guy. I mean, just not necessarily a guy you'd want to go hang out with, but he said if you want to predict the future, you have to invent it. That's the only way you got to just do it. And I guess the last
Is it
book,
Steve Jobs by Walter Isaac?
yes,
Okay.
yes,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that book, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's a great
And
book.
the
And
last one?
the fourth book, it's probably another old book would be Walden by Thoreau.
Yeah, yeah.
And my wife got me a first edition of that book a number of years ago, and
Wow.
every few years I'll pick it up and read it again. I read it when I was in high school, and it's stuck. It has just always stuck with me. I wouldn't say that I've taken everything from the book like simplify, 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 because
Uh-huh.
I definitely have not done that. But on the other hand, I think another message in the book is the appreciation of your surroundings, the appreciation of friends, the appreciation of nature. I think that that probably is what I took from that book and why every once in a while I'll pick it up again.
Well, thank you. Now, look, we're going to do the last of our 4 for 4. What 4 pieces of advice will you give our family and why? I know one of them earlier you suggested was do it, but what are the 4 critical pieces of advice you want people to leave listening to you with?
Don't be afraid to fail. Don't be afraid of it. You know, um, you don't have to be the smartest person in the room. That surround yourself with really smart people, and amazing how smart you'll look.
Mhm.
Um, if you're in business, let people do their jobs. Let people and know that things are not going to always go 100% right for them, and be
Mhm.
there to support them when things don't go right. And probably the last piece, and probably the hardest one of all, is if you need to replace someone, do it early.
Wow.
And,
Well,
and actually, can I give a fifth?
oh, please. Yes.
Hire people for where you want to go, not where you are. Don't hire people that you think you can grow to their job. When you're in the position of leadership, remember that you have a responsibility to all the people that work there, and that your decisions affect all of their lives. So when you're looking at a key position, find people who have. Look, there's a time when you can't do it,
Mhm.
but there's a story in my book about Tom Lynch.
Yes.
And my partner and I hired him when we could not afford to hire him. It meant that we could not take salaries ourselves to hire him. But this was someone that had multi-unit experience, which we did not have, that could that knew how to build a chain of uh, stores. And it was probably the smartest move we made in the whole company, because he had made all the mistakes. He knew the kind of pitfalls we were going to be up against. And so to hire people that have already driven across the country, that already know the roadmap to get you there. And even if it's a bit of a sacrifice, when you're in the position to do it, do it.
Just do it.
Yeah.
Michael J. Coles,
I have one last thing though I have to say.
you are incredible. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. What?
Just one last thing.
Yeah.
Um, my book, I'll say it one more time, all the royalties from the book, all the honorariums go to a scholarship fund that benefits veterans. The book is available on Amazon. If you buy the book, just know you're not just buying the book, but you're helping a veteran. If you like the book, write a review of the book on Amazon, because it helps sell books and it helps veterans in a bigger way.
And
And if
because all of it's going toward that cause, that's why I'm happy to celebrate it, to share it, and to hold it up.
I
This
appreciate it.
truly is a selfful selflessness that I think can be emulated in so many ways. Wow. From my heart to your van, thank you.
Thank you.